So we've got a long distance call going over Skype right now. Can you tell us your name and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, my name is Shane Turgeon. I do a lot. I own a tattoo, toy, and comic book store in Edmonton, Alberta called Shades of Grey. I am the co-founder and general manager of the Edmonton Comic and Entertainment Expo. I am the founder and director of the Edmonton Collector Con, and I am the author of a coffee table book on Star Wars tattoos called The Force in the Flesh.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's a lot to take on.
Yeah, I got a lot. I definitely am pretty busy, especially right now because our big expo is happening in 3 weeks, and then my book deadline is in 5 weeks, and then a month after that, I have one of my smaller shows, the Collector Con. So,
Well, that's pretty cool. So, what is it that you collect?
I primarily collect vintage Star Wars figures in 3 3/4 inch GI Joe, with an emphasis on prototype and pre-production material from those lines. But I also dabble in a lot of other 70s and 80s toy lines, comic books, and original comic book artwork.
So like what you mentioned Star Wars and GI Joes and prototypes and things like that. Like, what are some of the cool prototypes that you have?
In the Star Wars world, I have a run, which is basically what a lot of pre-production collectors will try to do, is put together as many examples of something from the development of one particular action figure or toy, and that's called a run. And I have a run on a droid animated character called Thal Jobin, where I have pretty much every known example of pre-production material, everything from the original wax sculpt to several hard copies, different first shots, the original packaging painting, several packaging proofs, and every known prototype for the coin that came with the figure. With G.I. Joe, I have a few different runs. I have some early 2D material for Firefly version 1, including the original dossier that became his file card.
Okay.
I have original packaging paintings. I have massive hard copies for vehicles like the Night Raven. I have steel molds for Polish bootleg figures. And a lot of different, various styrene models and hard copies and first shots and packaging proofs for several different G.I. Joe figures as well.
Okay. So how did you meet Gyre Viper?
To be honest, we've never actually met in person.
Oh, really?
But just through mutual friends online, once he kind of started getting... I think, to be honest, I was kind of one of the pioneers in terms of G.I. Joe prototypes and pre-production material, and I wrote a lot of early articles and stuff like that, and I think once he got interested in pre-production stuff, he kind of started reading my articles and then found me, and we became friends through several other mutual friends.
Okay.
How many GI Joe figures would you say that you have altogether, and how many like Star Wars? Could you guess? I mean.
Oh yeah, I can easily guess. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I am a quality over quantity collector.
Oh,
so
okay.
my collection is not very big, but it's full of mind-blowing things. So in terms of just sheer numbers, I have a complete loose set of vintage figures and a complete set of GI Joe figures from 1982 to 1989.
Okay.
And that's really about it. I don't really go overboard in terms of finding, having thousands and thousands and thousands of figures anymore. I'm more about just having a nice, refined, small collection.
Okay. Is it mostly stuff that's loose, or is it in box, or how do you collect things?
Well, I much prefer loose stuff, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that I haven't gone down the route of mint on card and mint in box before. I used to love mint in box vehicles from both Star Wars and G.I. Joe, and I had almost everything from both lines. But that stuff takes up a lot of space, and it gets really exhausting, to have that kind of dedication to a thing. So, originally it was the loose toys that I played with as a kid. So after I sold off a large portion of my collection, I decided that I wanted to keep loose sets because that was where that reminder was. So I have my loose sets, a handful of mint on card pieces, and then I really focus on the prototype and pre-production stuff.
Okay.
I had a friend once who was collecting Star Wars figures in package, and I walked in and they had a whole room, and they were all just kind of attached to the walls all the way around the room, and it just you can see why it's just they take up a lot of room, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially something like that, where you can just take them out of the package and put them in a glass case like behind you, and like there they all are type of thing. So
for sure, and modern collecting especially becomes very, very difficult if you're trying to get one of everything or two of everything. And I'm a vintage guy. I'm not into modern collecting at all. Modern collecting to me is akin to shopping. And you don't have a diverse or a unique collection if all you're doing is going to Target and Walmart every week to buy the same things that everybody else who's modern collecting.
Right.
Eventually, when you have your walls plastered like that full of modern stuff, it looks like a Walmart end cap threw up all over your room.
That's true. No, that's completely true. Yeah.
So, and that's not the kind of collection that I want to have. I want to have a collection of stuff that, yeah, maybe people won't recognize it as soon as they walk in, but the people who do know what it is walk in and they're like,
so what do you do? What do you do for fun outside of collecting?
I try to stay pretty busy with other things. I am a second-degree black belt in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, so I teach Japanese Jiu-Jitsu quite a bit. I like to go longboarding, skateboarding, and walking my dogs really is kind of my big thing. Is just starting and ending my day with a dog walk is kind of like my meditative point and my where I get to refocus on after I full days of running 3 different businesses.
Okay, so we've got a couple general questions. One of them was, why do you think people collect in general?
I think people collect in general because there's just this inherent thing, is the inherent need to, have something. That's a really difficult question to answer because I think everybody's reasons are different. I came from a family that collecting was like not an option. Nobody in my family on any level was a collector of any kind.
Oh wow.
So I just kind of came into it and fell into it through comic books first and into the toys and action figures. And I think everybody probably has their own reasons for it, whether it's just a passing interest in something, or through being brought up through family members who also collect. I think everybody's reasons for collecting are as diverse as the amount of things that you can collect.
Okay. Would you say that, have you ever been a completionist, maybe, like where you had to get everything? My brother and I were kind of like that when we were growing up. Like we really when we collected certain things, we really wanted to get all of them.
Yeah, like Ninja Turtle action figures or He-Mans or Transformers, when they're out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, it wasn't so much because I actually grew up relatively poor. So, I was just lucky to get, one figure here and there or whatnot. And, I basically save up all my allowance to be able to go to the store to get something. So as a kid, not really. As I started collecting, more into my teens and as an adult, I was like, well, yeah, I want to get a complete loose set of vintage Star Wars figures, or a complete loose set of vintage G.I. Joe figures, or Masters of the Universe figures.
Right.
Modern-wise, I did dabble a little bit in modern stuff when it first started coming out, but I never really felt the desire to have everything. And I've been to some of the world's largest collections of different things, and having been to Steve Sansweet's, Star Wars museum, where he's got a 9,000 square foot museum dedicated to everything, and that will curb your desire to be a completist, right in there, in my opinion, just because there's, as amazing it is to see, and as much as you admire the dedication, it's like, I can't get to that point in my life. Like, I really need to make sure that, I've got everything a little bit more, focused for myself personally.
Right. Do you still have any of the toys you used to have when you were a kid?
I do. I have a handful of things. I have my original Slave 1, my original Snowspeeder, 2 Ewoks, and a Yonezawa robot from, it's a Japanese talking robot. My uncle was stationed in Saudi Arabia doing oil field work in the 80s, and he bought that up, and that robot actually speaks Arabic, which is pretty neat.
That's cool. So do you have a holy grail? Or what would you say is your most significant piece in your collection?
I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of significant pieces in my collection. In terms of certain things, there are only, to the best of our knowledge, 7 G.I. Joe packaging paintings pre-1990 that are outside of Hasbro's archives, and I have 2 of those.
Oh wow!
2 of those 7. So I mean that in and of itself is pretty spectacular. For Holy Grails for myself, I would probably say, like wax sculpts for either Firefly version 1 or for Night Viper would probably be the things that I'm looking for the most. Star Wars wise, it's not so much a Holy Grail, but something that I'm desperate for is, it's for my Thal Jobin Focus collection, and they made these tiny little 1-inch cupcake toppers in Spain. And they made a Thal Jobin one in 5 different colors, and I'm missing 1 color, and they're incredibly scarce. So I'm hoping one day that a yellow one turns up so I can complete that set.
That's awesome. What do your family and friends think of your collection?
My family has actually, been pretty supportive. I started collecting when I was 13, mostly with comic books, and then graduated into toys. And my dad was always taking me to the comic book store once a week so I could clear up my file. So it's something that they've always been very supportive of and very understanding of. I don't think they get it really per se, but they know that it's actually, I'm one of those few people who's been able to turn that into kind of their lifestyle and kind of their career. And I've made a lot of different, things happen because of it. It's opened up a lot of doors, and I've traveled the world because of it. So I think people like look at it and they see it as something that has actually been very enriching for my life in terms of travel or friendship or career opportunities, as opposed to somebody else who's just collecting a whole bunch of shit.
Okay. So you mentioned you've been around the world. Where places have you been collecting?
I have traveled extensively through Europe, Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru, and all across Canada, and looking for toys and stuff.
Wow, that's cool. Do you get a lot of foot traffic in your store to check out your toys?
To be honest, I mean, we do get a lot of people coming up and checking it out. There's not a lot of serious collectors who come by. It seems that vintage toys is not the big thing to be collecting here in Edmonton. But the people who do come in are like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And we're primarily a tattoo shop, and that's kind of our big driver. So people like to come into our tattoo shop just because of the the environment that we have with being almost a gallery-esque vintage shop.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot more comfortable than walking into some big biker shop with a bunch of dudes sitting behind the counter like, you get your tattoo, what do you want? So people come into our shop and we've got a giant Yoda statue in the middle of the shop, and all the toys that you grew up with, and automatically they feel a lot more comfortable.
That's cool.
Do you get a lot of people offering to buy the stuff that you have?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and 90% of everything in the shop is for sale.
Oh, okay.
Wow. What do you know of perceived value when in your travels? Like, how would you define perceived value with people's collections?
Well, perceived value and real value are, they're inherently tied to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Perceived value is like if you know that something is worth X amount of dollars, or that somebody is willing to pay you X amount of dollars for a piece. That's the actual value beyond perceived value. There are a lot of people though who have unrealistic expectations of what their stuff might be worth, and that's where perception can kind of come into play and make things give people the wrong idea of what stuff is worth.
So how would you define nostalgia?
Nostalgia is that overwhelming feeling that you get for your past, whether it's through certain memories or certain items, and it's that desire and that want to kind of relive certain feelings that you had from when you were growing up, and you get that a sensory and almost tactile response to something that you had a fondness for in years gone by.
Do you feel a lot of nostalgia to your stuff that you have now?
I do, and I think that most vintage collectors engage more, are engaged more from a nostalgia perspective than they are from any other perspective, because it was, that love of what we were into when we were growing up that makes people want to do this now, and collect those toys or those comic books or those movie posters from years gone by. And so nostalgia plays a huge factor, I think, in it when it comes to vintage collecting, especially.
Okay.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but would you say what would you say is the most you've ever paid for a piece in your collection?
I usually don't like to talk about value, but I will say this: when you start to get more and more serious about collecting, the first time you spend. If you're used to just spending $10 on modern toys, and then the first time you spend $50 or $100 on something, you're like, whoa, man, I just spent $50 on this. I just spent $100 on this item. And then that $100 gets a lot easier. And then it's like, oh, man, I just spent $500 on something. I can't believe I did that. And then $500 gets a little easier to swallow. And then it's like, oh, shit, I just spent $1,000 on something. And, you kind of feel like you got hit by a bus. But then $1,000 gets easier, and then it's $3,000, and then it's $5,000, and then it's $10,000 you spend on something, and
wow.
Before you know it, the money doesn't really matter at all.
Huh.
Wow.
I saw some TV show where a guy paid like $17,000 for a Boba Fett prototype where he had the rocket pack on his back.
Yeah, that was the Toy Hunter. That's my friend Jordan's show.
Yeah, that was crazy. I was like $17,000. I was like, that's insane amount to be dropping.
But I mean, that honestly, you know, that's nothing in this day and age when it comes to collecting. Pop culture collectibles are so on the rise that we're seeing records being set, you know, over and over and over again in every industry, whether it's, you know, original comic book artwork or vintage toys or high-end comic books. You know, the best of the best pieces are constantly setting new record prices. In the vintage Star Wars world, you know, a lot of the old timers like myself are sitting back and being like, wow, when did all this stuff become worth so much money, especially when it comes to prototype and pre-production stuff? And that's because all of the good material is locked up in private collections. So any new blood entering the hobby, if they've got money, they have to throw big amounts of money just to get people to consider selling it, let alone to actually get them to sell it.
Yeah, I just saw the first appearance of Superman went for like $3.2 million the other day.
Yeah.
That's just
yeah,
insane.
I mean, original comic art is constantly setting records. You know, the first, it was the last page of Incredible Hulk 180, which is the first appearance of Wolverine, sold for over $600,000.
Wow.
You know, it's just funny because I remember time growing up when this stuff was not cool. This stuff was like, you know, in high school, junior high, you know, this is stuff we used to get picked on for, you know, because we, you know, so kids would have to come to school with trench coats, you know, hiding the comic books, like selling them like drugs at school, you know, just because, you know, it just wasn't accepted to collect these types of things, like just socially. And now it's everywhere, and now you're not cool if you don't like this stuff.
For sure, you know, and you know, with me having a television show in development now that revolves around toy collecting, it's like, okay, so this is the stuff that I used to get beat up for in high school, and now they want to put me on television for it. And
now they were throwing money at you.
It's hard to compute that sometimes to be like, wow, it's amazing how this has exploded to become such a, you know, worldwide and culturally accepted phenomenon. But you know, when you look and you think that, you know, Avengers is the #1 grossing movie in the box office, Guardians of the Galaxy now, or Batman, or Spider-Man, or Superman, all of these movies are raking in record profits at the box office. It's because, you know, people are you know, more comfortable in just being like, hey, I'm a geek and I'm okay with that. You know, and a lot of the old timers, you know, they hate that term geek chic, and they don't like how popular it's become. But on the flip side, if it didn't become this popular, I wouldn't be able to do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like The Big Bang Theory being like the #1 show on TV, and it's just like all they do is talk about stuff that we talk about. I'm like, this is insane. Like, you know, I keep thinking about all the jocks in high school and all the preppy kids, and I'm like, haha, the tables have turned now, haven't they? You know, now I want to go back to, you know, my high school days and be like, one day you guys, it's gonna suck to be you.
Yeah, it's funny too. I mean, we've got 2 people from The Big Bang Theory coming to our Edmonton Expo at the end of the month.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's created almost a bit of a rift. Because, you know, obviously we want to attract as many mainstream people into our show as possible to boost our ticket sales. Sure. So having those kinds of guests is going to do that. But then all of the old time geeks who don't like that show and how it's made it so popular, like, oh, well, you know, that's not real geeks who are coming, you know, and it's created this divide of people who are like, you know, the people who took their lumps to make it cool for everybody else now.
Yeah, you know, but now I'm thinking like, oh, great, now another 20 years, it's not going to be cool again, and we're all going to be dorks again.
Yeah.
But I'm totally okay with that. I would way rather be the dorky kid than the cool kid any day of the week.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think about people who hide away their collections?
To be perfectly honest, I like to share my collection and with as many people as possible, but I definitely appreciate the reasons for people hiding away, and there's a lot of it, you know. I've seen a lot of people with self-entitlement issues get really upset with people thinking that they demand to, you know, or they deserve to see and experience everybody else's stuff. And it really puts a lot of people off, especially when you put something out there to share and everybody's like, oh, how much is it? I want to buy it. How much is it? I want to buy it. It's like, no, I'm just trying to share that with you. And those prevailing attitudes of entitlement and wanting to buy is what makes people go underground with their collections.
Wow.
And you know, and I've been through that. I've had people steal images of mine to create custom card backs of, you know, of original concept artwork that I own.
Oh, wow.
I've had people who have gone after me in big ways saying that, you know, like, so I shared 75% of my collection, but I'm keeping 25% of it a secret, and all of a sudden I'm a big evil monster because I don't want to share those other pieces for whatever reason that was. And it's those kind of attitudes that make people want to hide their collections away. And I think it's really unfortunate because I think the hobby grows and is that much better when everybody's sharing, all the cool stuff that we've been able to collect and uncover.
Yeah, I like to use my Nintendo. I have a room full of Nintendo stuff, and it's got He-Man and all kinds of really vintage stuff. And people just come. I use it as a social piece. When people come in, and they just see the room, and they're like, "Oh man, this is awesome! I loved it!" Like they're taken back, and that's what I really like about it, is bringing those memories back to people. And yeah, so that's how I like to share my collection.
It's interesting too, because us traveling around and talking to different people with different collections. I mean, we've seen rare prototypes of all kinds of things. From, I mean, like I said, the guy who has a laser tag stuff. I mean, like the toy laser tag, he's got prototypes of stuff that was never released, or like everyone's seen the little black rifles people have, the little pistols, and he's got like a white one. There's only like 6 of in the whole world or something, or this guy's got a Mickey Mouse collection, or a guy from Barnum and Bailey's who's got stuff nobody's ever seen, or it's interesting, or the prototypes of the first GI Joes and things like that. It's cool to see, even in just this little endeavor, like what people have, like what we've uncovered, just like of what people have. And it seems like every piece to people's collection has a story behind it. Like there's something, it's like, especially all the rare stuff, there's like these really cool stories of either how they got it, or how it was made, or how just the history behind it that just nobody knows.
Mm-hmm.
And like and people really just take a lot of pride in those things, and that's one thing that's been really cool about this whole project that we've been doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really cool to hear the stories, and that's what we're trying to do with this documentary, is find those stories and tell those. So
yeah, and to be honest, like collecting is nothing without the stories and the adventures and the friendships that come from it.
yeah.
If you're collecting in a vacuum, you are not experiencing anything, or you're not experiencing everything that the hobby has to offer you, whatever hobby that is that you're into. If you don't have any friends that you're sharing it with, then what's the point?
now, you told us previously when we talked before that you were an appraiser of some sort in Canada. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I am a certified appraiser through the Canadian Personal Property Appraisers Group. I was the first person in Canada to be certified to specialize in pop culture collectibles, be it toys, comic books, original comic book artwork, movie posters, things like that. I did that because in Canada you have to have an appraisal report in order to get insurance for your collection. And I was looking around at all the different types of appraisers there were, and there's nobody who's even remotely competent or qualified to understand what my stuff is. So why would I expect them to be able to give me an appraisal report? And I figured there were probably a lot of other people in my shoes. So given the knowledge that I had and the reputation and the experience level that I have, I figured, well, maybe I should be that guy to give that, that opportunity to people to be able to appraise their collections. Since then, there's been one other friend of mine in Canada who has gotten a certification, so now there are 2 of us. But it's a great thing to be able to offer that, because at the end of the day, somebody who specializes in farm equipment isn't going to know the difference between a US 12A Darth Vader 12-back versus a Canadian GDE 12C Darth Vader 12-back, and the sheer value difference between those 2 pieces.
Wow. Yeah, I have no idea what the value of those are at all. But no.
But I appreciate that you know that, because that's awesome.
So there's 2 people in all of Canada that are licensed to, or that are licensed to certified.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, like comic book store dealers and stuff like that, like they can appraise things. They can tell you how much stuff is worth.
Right.
But in terms of an actual certified report for your insurance company, there are only 2 of us that can do that.
Wow. Okay, so does that mean that you do a lot of traveling just for that?
To be honest, I have had to limit the amount of appraisals that I do just because of all of my other projects.
Okay.
Having that certification has helped open a lot of doors for those other projects, but in terms of the actual doing appraisals, I have had to kind of scale back the amount that I do just because of everything else. And to be honest, like collectors are, they love spending money on their collection, but they're not so big on spending money to preserve their collection. So when I tell them what my price is, which isn't that much money, they all balk. They go, oh, well, I can't afford to spend that. I'm like, really? Well, you're sitting on $10,000 worth of stuff, and it's not worth a couple of $100 to protect that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. One thing we've noticed is that, and you might be able to, you might know more about this, but one thing we talked about was that people buy like protectors for their stuff that have protectors that have protectors. I mean, we went to Gen Con, and I like Magic cards, and like they have normal sleeves to keep your cards protected, and now they have sleeve protectors. So it's like wow, where does this end? I mean, it's like protectors for protectors for protectors. I like to keep my stuff protected. But man, do you think there's a lot of money to be made in collection protection?
Absolutely. I mean, like I've got a good friend in Mexico who has a company that just makes acrylic cases.
Wow.
For loose action figures or proof cards or carded figures or specialized custom acrylic cases for boxed vehicles and stuff like that. Like that's what he does. My framer makes a lot of money off of me for all of the original comic art and animation art that I bring to him to get framed, because you can have all of your art protected in an Itoya portfolio, and you can flip through that portfolio, and that's all well and good, but I also want to enjoy it on my wall. So I also want to make sure that if I'm going to hang it on my wall, that I'm not going to like the McDonald's of framing Michaels and just getting some crappy shitty glass and acid backing and stuff like that to put my art on. I'm going to go full-blown museum quality to preserve and protect my art and my investment in that art.
Okay. One thing I've noticed I've been doing is I've been buying a lot of stuff that I used to have as a kid for my children. And do you see a lot of people doing that? Why do you think people do that?
I think it's that familiarity thing where you can relate to your kid, in that they like this item and you grew up with that item, and then you can have that bond and you can share that. There's a really big reason why, brands like Star Wars, Transformers, Masters of the Universe, My Little Pony, and are resurging again and are at the top of the toy charts, because that generation that grew up with them is now having those kids, and they loved those toys then, so now they get to share that experience of loving that toy with their children now.
Yeah, his 3-year-old Farron can name like every He-Man figure. It's scary.
It's hilarious.
Oh, we have friends of ours that come over and she'll start naming them off. People are like, I didn't even know they had that many characters.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah,
that's cool. And then like you can relate to that with your kid, and it's just one more reason and one more way for you to to have that relationship and to grow that relationship.
Yeah, I guess that is true. I think maybe that is what I'm trying to do, is trying to get that personal tie between us and being able to find that common ground between us. I'm sure that's why I'm doing it, but that is a good point.
But I just had a friend come into the shop today, and she's got her son is in grade 12, and he grew up loving Star Wars, and I've known the family for probably 7 years, so since he was about 10. And when he was 10, he was like all about my Star Wars collection and my Star Wars toys and stuff like that. But now, as a kid and going into grade 12, him and his mom can relate to going to comic book and pop culture conventions together, because she loves going to those shows and he loves all of that. And I mean, really, to have something that you can relate with your kid in grade 12 is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that's true. One thing I've noticed too is that there appears to be this like weird vicious cycle that when we like collectors, when they're children, like they'll eventually either grow out of it, they'll think they're too cool for it. At least this is how it was, I think, for our generation. It's like they think it's too cool for it, so they'll either sell it or get rid of it, or their parents will get rid of it, like what happened with me and my brother's stuff. And then we'll be fine without it for 20 years, and then all of a sudden someone's like, hey, did you ever play Contra? And I'm like, yeah, I used to play Contra. And then all of a sudden you find yourself on eBay recollecting like your entire childhood, and that's exactly what happened to me. Do you think that's prevalent? Do you think that's kind of a normal thing?
I think that is the natural progression for a lot of people, especially with nostalgia-based collectible industries.
Oh, yeah.
For the generations older than us, it was coins and stamps, and it was tin robots and it was trains. And as those generations have gotten older, we're not into our grandfathers and our fathers' toys. We're into the stuff that we grew up with, as being, a product of the 80s, basically, and having those half-an-hour toy commercials, pumped to us every Saturday morning after the laws changed in 1982 that allowed them to do that.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, well, I'm growing up, I've got disposable cash, I want to relate to, things that made me happy as a kid, and if I have kids, I want to have a way to be able to relate to them as well.
And what do you think about all the commercial advertising back when we were kids? What is your opinion on all that?
Well, I'm of two minds of it. Obviously, the kid who grew up in it and who is sitting in a room full of it right now loves it and thinks that it's pretty great. But I also think it's kind of heinous to be able to advertise to kids in such a direct manner to make them want to spend their parents' money and feel like this is what they need to have in order to have a great childhood. I think that that's kind of a dick move on the part of like massive corporations to do that to kids. But I could go on and on about a lot of those kind of social philosophies around this sort of stuff too.
Are there any memorable stories about your own collection you'd want to share with us?
To be honest, I have so many memorable stories about my collection. I could probably make a documentary of my own about it. Like I said, I think collecting is nothing without the stories, the adventures, and the friendships. And I have traveled the world. I have dug through flea markets in Mexico. I have gone through to the sites where they filmed the Star Wars movies. I've filmed television sizzle reels in Peru looking for toys. Wow. I've done all kinds of amazing things and met so many awesome people and found stuff in the weirdest places. There's stuff that I never would have expected. I've discovered things that nobody knew existed. Wow. And brought those to the knowledge of the collective hobbies that I'm a part of, and those are the stories that that make this go round.
So you have a lot of really cool stories about preserving the history by collecting all this stuff too.
For sure, absolutely, and to be perfectly honest, I mean, for me in my life right now, collecting is nowhere near as important as it used to be, but what is important is the friendships that the collecting has given me, because the closest people in my life and the closest people in my world have come in some way through collecting.
Wow, that's really cool. Have you ever seen a collection get out of hand?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of collections get out of hand. I've seen people come in really hard into a hobby and they all of a sudden want to be a big player. Oh. So they start spending tens of thousands of dollars unbeknownst to their family, and the next thing you know, they're getting divorced. I have seen collecting ruin families.
Okay. Do you have you ever run into any situations like a hoarding situation with some collectors while during like an appraisal or something?
Yeah, I've definitely known a lot of people who have probably guilty of hoarding in some way. I've known some Transformer collectors who, for whatever reason, at the time Beast Wars was big, I knew a guy who needed to buy every single Rat Trap that he ever saw in a store.
Wow.
And at one point, he had hundreds of Rat Trap figures on card. I was like, why do you need all those?
He's got the corner.
Don't quite understand that.
Wow.
Better those than real rats, I guess, in your house.
This is true. There definitely is a fine line between collecting and obsessing and hoarding. And I think that line is different for everybody. I think so there are some people who can have massive collections that I don't think are obsessed with it, and I don't think it's an unhealthy thing. And I know people with way less stuff that it is definitely an obsession, and it definitely is unhealthy. So I think it does vary from person to person.
Sure.
Okay. You had mentioned in an email that you had a personal life experience that kind of changed your view on collecting. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know where to really begin with it. Suffice it to say that within a very short period of time, I went from having a career of 10 years and being married to quitting my career to open my brand new business and being divorced in about the same 2-month period.
Wow.
And then after opening my business and it not quite going the way that it should have, and being in business with the wrong people, and almost losing that business, then there was a heavy emotional toll that came with all of that, because all of that happened within about a year of itself. And it left me in a pretty devastated place. I make no bones in saying that I struggled with depression for a long time. I'm trying to be a lot more outspoken about depression because of that, because I think it is something that people need to speak about. And it really made me realize that I had put so much effort and emphasis into the acquisition of things and the happiness that comes from the acquisition of things, as opposed to, everything else around me that I was missing. And I kind of realized that I had spent most of my 20s with my head buried in the sand, not knowing what I wanted to do with myself, and expressing that lack of direction and putting it specifically into the hobby. I was getting to the point where I was getting, 5 or 6 packages a week. I was buying so much stuff.
Wow.
I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, I never have. But my addiction, like an alcoholic will, bury that lack of direction they have in themselves by getting drunk. Well, I was burying that lack of direction in myself in buying stuff. Oh. And after, realizing how vapid that is and how unrewarding that really is, I kind of, took a step back and looked at things, and, there were certain attitudes and certain beliefs that I had around my collection and collecting that needed to go out the window. And as I recognized that, then I was like, okay, well, maybe I should actually sell off my collection. And I kind of went to this point where I was like, I'm selling everything. I'm done. I'm getting out.
Wow.
It's time for a complete fresh start. Some very good friends in the hobby kind of talked me off that ledge when I approached them with what I was planning to do. And I'm grateful that they did that, because, I was swinging from one extreme to the other. And, after selling 75% of my collection off and keeping the things that I really enjoy, I'm left now with a collection that, I'm very, very happy with, and is full of amazing items, and I have a much healthier balance with it. I might buy 2 or 3 things a year now, as opposed to 2 or 3 things a week or a day like I was doing before.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any advice for people who might find themselves in a similar situation?
Any advice that I have to give to people in that sort of a situation is to really take a step back, and evaluate what is actually important in your life, and evaluate what actually makes you happy. Because if happiness is coming from the acquisition of things, then I would suggest that you may not be actually happy, be truly happy. And you need to kind of take a step back and find those things that give you real, honest happiness, and kind of rebuild from there.
Okay. So are you happy now?
I'm happier than I've ever been.
That's fantastic. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So when it comes to preserving people's collections, what advice would you give? Would you say buying 2, keeping 1 in a box? When it comes to actually collecting things, is that good advice?
To be honest, I don't think collecting modern items at all is really a good use of your money, or a good investment strategy. Mm-hmm. There are so many ways that you can look at collecting. Doesn't matter what you're into. Where you can just be buying and buying and buying stuff for the sake of collecting things. Is it really a good use of your time and a really good use of your energy? If it's why you need to identify why you're collecting in the first place. If you are collecting for investment, you have to realize that maybe the things that you're collecting aren't actually investmentary pieces. They're not things that are going to make you money in the long run. If you're buying just because you like the nostalgia of something, or you like this particular action figure, or you like this particular sculpt, then by all means buy that. But don't buy 2 to keep 1 to keep in the package, and 1 if anybody has learned anything from the 1990s comic craze,
oh my gosh,
how much are your X-Force #1s worth right now?
I have 6 of them, so right. I hope they're worth a couple hundred.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, they're in my dollar bins.
Well, you're underselling them.
Death of Superman. What a fantastic investment that turned out to be.
Death of Superman. I
should have sold when it was high. It was $35. Now it's like $15.
Yeah. As an appraiser, I get a lot of people who come up to me and ask me investmentary questions, and my advice is always this: once something is manufactured to be a collectible, it inherently loses its collectability and its investment potential.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it usually is those hard to find items, the things that nobody picked up when they were out, and then now, nobody can find them because they only produced 6 of them that usually end up being worth the most amount of money. So. Yeah.
Well, it's an original use thing. When we were growing up, toys were meant to be played with. Toys were not meant to be saved. Nowadays, everybody's buying toys to save them. Back in the 30s, stamps were meant to be mailed. Nobody was, very few people were holding on to stamps just to, collect them thinking that they were going to be worth money down the road. When the original use has passed and that's when it becomes collectible.
Okay. Does your collection define you?
I think that some people would say, certainly in days gone by, that my collection has defined me, but I have never, ever felt that my collection has defined me. I've always felt that I've had more than enough balance in other things and more than enough interest in my life that, it isn't, that collecting doesn't define me and it isn't my life. It has certainly shaped a large portion of my life and the direction of my life, but it does not define it.
Okay. So, will you ever stop collecting?
I would like to say that there could come a point where I will stop collecting. But that said, I think I'll just transition the way that I do collect. Whether or not I end up, selling my entire collection and investing it into a one Gil Elvgren pinup painting from the 50s, I'm still collecting, right? Even though I'm not actively collecting at that point, and I still have a collection, even if it's one thing.
Okay. Would you ever consider selling any part of your collection?
Well, I've already sold 75% of my collection.
Okay.
And once you go down that route, it becomes a lot easier. Everything kind of more or less, it does eventually have a price tag on it. Okay. And to be honest, I feel that if the increase in prices and the increase in intention keeps going the way that it is right now, and within 5 years, if my collection continues to go up in value as it is, why wouldn't I sell it and buy a place in California so I can escape these brutal Canadian winters?
Yeah, we had a Canadian winter here this past. As a matter of fact, I kept calling it New Canada down here because it was
snowpocalypse. Yeah,
it was
pretty bad.
We had so much snow; it was crazy.
Well, the last 2 years here, winter has started in the middle of October and it has left in the middle of April. That is a solid 6 months of winter.
Wow.
That is bearable.
Okay. Yeah. So, should the inevitable happen, what will happen to your collection?
I have a very detailed direction of assets in my will. Okay. For my collection. And it's basically because my family or my friends might not know what it is, or they might not be around at the time that is. It's basically constantly updated to reflect the biggest dealers of this stuff that I collect, and it's basically call them, and they will come handle the collection sale. That way, the collection, the items are guaranteed to go back into the hobby. They're not going to end up getting thrown out by ungrateful family members or unknowing family members. The stuff will go out, and then the proceeds from that will either be donated to animal rescue charities, or if I have a family at that point in time, my family can choose to do what they will with it.
Okay.
Well, it's a good thing there's one other certified guide there in Canada to help you.
No, it's true. I have my collection appraised, and that list is included, I think. Sure. But I do strongly encourage people, as morbid as it sounds, I do strongly encourage people to have a solid direction of assets for their collection. You should have an appraisal report, and you should have direction, because you don't know that you could step out your house tomorrow and get hit by a bus. And I have, unfortunately, I've seen people pass away in the hobby, and I've seen their family have to struggle on how to deal with selling their collection. And I've seen it done the right way, and I've seen it done the wrong way. And nobody wants to think about dying, but you need to accept the inevitability that it's going to happen, and it can happen without, at times you don't expect. And you don't want to leave your family with that burden. So make it easy for them. Have an appraisal report, have it updated constantly, and have a direction of assets.
How often should they update the report?
I would say at least, once every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
Especially if you're involved in a collectibles field that is continuing to increase in value. Okay. And when things are skyrocketing in value, like if you're into vintage prototypes, or you're into original comic book art or high grade comic books, by all means, keep updating that as much as possible to make your market comparables, known, so that everybody knows, holy shit, this piece that I spent, $500 on is now a $10,000 item. You need to know that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, personally, it's something I haven't done. I know that after this, it's definitely opened my eyes to getting that done myself.
Well, and the really great thing is in the States, there's an amazing company called Collectibles Insurance Agency, and you don't actually. They may be changing things now, but the way it used to be is you don't actually need an appraisal report. All you need to do is say, I have a collection worth X amount of dollars, consisting of X amount of things, and you can get an insurance policy for that.
Okay. Cool.
In Canada, it's a little bit more complex. You need to actually have a certified report that is through your insurance company.
Okay.
But it is very, very important to have.
Okay. Cool. Our last question we have for you is, what matters most in your life?
Certainly not collecting, and certainly not everything you see behind me. I would imagine that there was a point in my 20s where I would have said collecting was probably the most important thing in my life. But after having my ass handed to me by life, that has changed a lot. And what is most important to me is just being surrounded by good people who love me.
Awesome.
Well, Shane, it was nice getting a chance to meet you and talk to you and get a chance to get a glimpse really into your life and what it is you collect. And, I think you've offered some really great perspectives on things that we hadn't even really heard from other people or even thought about, in a lot of different areas. So, but just thanks for your time, and we look forward to, hopefully seeing your show eventually on TV or something. And, and I guess we'll...
and maybe we'll get a chance to talk further in the future.
For sure. I really appreciate you guys having me part of this project. I think it's going to be a really interesting piece.
Cool. All right, thanks. Okay. All right, take it easy. Did you happen to go over the questions by chance?
Yeah, I've gone over them a couple times, so I've got a pretty good idea of what you're looking for.
Okay, we'll throw those out because we're going to start with all new questions. No kidding.
Oh,
No, just kidding.
I'm just messing with you, man.